Hello everyone, and welcome to my General Hospital Today channel. The shocking revelation that has rocked Port Charles to its core begins with the long-whispered rumors surrounding the grainy, clandestine photos of Sonny Corinthos and Mayor Laura Collins, images that not only jeopardized their reputations but also set off a chain of betrayals, threats, and desperate cover-ups that stretched far beyond anyone's imagination. For weeks, speculation spiraled as Sonny's associates scrambled to uncover who had aided Sidwell in orchestrating the covert surveillance that captured Sonny and Laura in what appeared to be an explosive, compromising exchange. Laura, for her part, attempted to maintain her composure as City Hall buzzed with gossip, while Sonny's enemies seized the opportunity to strike at his empire during a moment of perceived vulnerability. Yet neither of them, despite their sharp instincts and long history of surviving treachery, anticipated the identity of the person who had secretly stood beside Sidwell, camera in hand, hiding in the shadows, watching them with cold precision. The truth, when it finally came to light, stunned the entire town because the accomplice was someone deeply embedded in Port Charles, someone who had mastered the art of invisibility, someone who had long been underestimated, Mason Gatlin, the stone-faced manipulator who had slithered through the cracks of the town's underworld. But this reveal did not occur with a dramatic confrontation or a sudden confession. It unfolded slowly, through a trail of missteps, overheard conversations, and the unraveling of Mason's own arrogance. Mason had been operating under the radar for months, carefully weaving himself into Sidwell's operations, exploiting Sidwell's desperation for leverage over both Sonny and Laura. Sidwell believed Mason was merely an informant, but Mason, with his calculating mind, saw far more potential. He saw an opportunity to regain control, to strike at those who had pushed him to the margins, and to reclaim his place in the hierarchy of Port Charles crime by proving he could outmaneuver Sonny Corinthos himself. Night after night, Mason tailed Laura's vehicle from City Hall to the waterfront, memorizing patterns, noting every exit and alleyway. His plan crystallized when he discovered a private meeting between Laura and Sonny, a meeting born from mutual concern about rising threats in Port Charles, but one that easily appeared scandalous when captured from the wrong angle. Mason waited in the shadows, using low-grade equipment that would appear amateurish enough to throw off suspicion while ensuring Sidwell believed he was working with someone inexperienced rather than a seasoned handler who had participated in far more dangerous operations. Sidwell himself was oblivious to the true danger he had invited into his orbit, thinking Mason was just another lackey eager for a payday. But Mason wasn't driven by money, he wanted revenge. Revenge on Austin's memory being tarnished, revenge on Ava for turning her back on him, revenge on Sonny for dismantling the chain of criminals Mason once answered to, and revenge on Laura for interfering in his family's affairs. The night the photos were taken was draped in fog, the docks lit only by failing lamps and the occasional flicker from distant boats. Sonny and Laura were deep in conversation about the rising threat Sidwell posed, unaware that just yards away, Mason crouched behind a stack of crates with a high-zoom lens, snapping frame after frame. But what no one knew was that Mason also recorded the conversation, capturing not compromise, but concern, strategy, and two leaders desperately trying to prevent a larger war. Sidwell, however, didn't care about context. When Mason delivered the photos, Sidwell saw them as the perfect weapon, a scandal waiting to erupt, something to shake the town, something to break Sonny's credibility and Laura's political footing. But Mason, ever 2 steps ahead, retained the audio files for himself in case Sidwell attempted to cut him out. What unraveled next was chaos. Sidwell released the photos to a handful of corrupt contacts, creating a media storm that sent both Laura and Sonny scrambling to contain the fallout. Sonny suspected multiple enemies at play, but it wasn't until Brick intercepted a coded message, one only Mason would use, that the truth began to take shape. Meanwhile, Laura sensed that the blackmailer had intimate knowledge of her schedule, something only someone familiar with her routines could possess. When she voiced her suspicions to Kevin, she unknowingly set off the psychological unraveling of the final thread, Mason's growing paranoia. Cornered by his own miscalculations, Mason tried to disappear from Port Charles, but his attempt was intercepted when Dex and Chase independently tracked him to a rundown motel on the outskirts of town. What followed was a tense confrontation where Mason's trademark stoicism cracked, revealing the bitter resentment that fueled his actions. He admitted, in his chilling monotone, that he helped Sidwell not out of loyalty but to remind Port Charles that he was still a threat, still a piece of the puzzle people were foolish to overlook. But Mason didn't stop there. He revealed that Sidwell planned to use the photos as merely the first step in a much larger scheme designed to pit Sonny and Laura against each other, weakening alliances, fracturing trust, and creating chaos Sidwell could exploit for power. Mason's confession, once relayed to Sonny and Laura, left them shaken, not only because of the photos themselves, but because of the deeper implications. Sidwell had tried to orchestrate the destruction of 2 pillars of Port Charles, and Mason, thinking he could manipulate the situation to his own advantage, had nearly succeeded in turning the town upside down. The revelation felt like a betrayal on multiple levels, particularly for Laura, who had crossed paths with Mason many times but never suspected he would escalate to such treachery. Sonny, for his part, reacted with a simmering fury, not only because Mason invaded his privacy but because Mason threatened Laura, a line Sonny would never allow anyone to cross. The fallout continued as Sidwell, learning that Mason had been captured, panicked and attempted to destroy the remaining evidence tying him to the scheme. But Mason had planned for this too. He had hidden digital backups in a location only Sonny could uncover, ensuring that even in defeat, he would maintain some semblance of leverage. When Sonny accessed the hidden files, he realized Mason had also recorded Sidwell's voice, discussing future targets and strategies, information that could put half the town at risk. For the first time in years, Sonny and Laura stood united not just in defense, but in shared determination to dismantle Sidwell's operation once and for all. And as Port Charles absorbed the shocking truth that Mason Gatlin was the person who helped Sidwell orchestrate the blackmail photos, the town collectively grappled with a new reality. If someone as unassuming yet dangerous as Mason could infiltrate the highest levels of the city's leadership and strike at 2 of its most influential figures, then no one was safe from the shadows lurking just beyond the glow of Port Charles's streetlights. The revelation ignited new alliances, reignited old feuds, and set off a domino effect that would reshape the destiny of everyone connected to Sidwell, to Sonny, and to Laura. Because in Port Charles, every secret has a cost, every betrayal demands consequences, and every truth, no matter how deeply buried, eventually claws its way into the light. But the fallout from Mason Gatlin being revealed as the shadowy accomplice who helped Sidwell take the blackmail photos of Sonny and Laura did not simply settle into the usual rhythm of Port Charles scandals. Instead, it unraveled into something far more volatile, a tangled storm that reached into every corner of the city, dredging up buried grudges, forgotten alliances, and the kinds of secrets people thought had been safely locked away for years. As news spread, the revelation became the spark that inflamed tensions across factions, igniting whispers in alleyways, fueling confrontations at Kelly's, and sending ripples of anxiety through police headquarters, where Jordan and Anna scrambled to assess the damage. For them, Mason's involvement meant far more than a simple blackmail scheme. It signaled a resurgence of a deeper criminal network that had gone dormant, or so they believed. Meanwhile, Laura, ever composed in public, struggled privately with the emotional blow of discovering that Mason had been studying her movements, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Her fears weren't for herself but for the people she loved, Kevin, Spencer, and all the citizens she was sworn to protect. Her meeting with Sonny on the docks, intended as a confidential strategy discussion, had now become weaponized into scandal, and Laura felt the weight of the consequences on her shoulders. Kevin attempted to reassure her, but even he sensed the truth. This was no isolated act of revenge. It was a sign that the undercurrent of corruption in Port Charles was growing stronger, emboldened by Sidwell's ambition and Mason's calculated cruelty. Sonny, on the other hand, found himself grappling with a rare moment of personal vulnerability. Having his private meeting exposed wasn't what rattled him, it was the idea that someone like Mason had managed to infiltrate the edges of his world without detection. For a man who built his empire on instinct, control, and a network of loyal allies, the discovery dug into him like a blade. He met with Brick, Dex, and Spinelli, each offering pieces of information that painted a troubling picture. Sidwell had gained access to resources he shouldn't have, made contacts outside Port Charles, and now had a network extending into neighboring cities. And Mason, though captured, had only been the first domino. As Sonny absorbed the intelligence reports, his fury sharpened into clarity. Sidwell wasn't trying to embarrass him, Sidwell was trying to destabilize him. And destabilizing Sonny Corinthos meant destabilizing every power structure in Port Charles. With that realization, Sonny turned his focus to the fragile alliances around him. He called a covert meeting with Valentine Cassadine, knowing Valentine's connections and strategic mind could be invaluable. Valentine, intrigued and cautious, agreed, partly out of respect for Laura and partly because he sensed Sidwell's growing reach could eventually interfere with his own operations. Together, Sonny and Valentine began mapping out Sidwell's network, a web of dealers, informants, and corrupt officials who had been quietly feeding Sidwell everything he needed. Meanwhile, Laura took her own steps, summoning a private session with Jordan and Anna to discuss the implications for City Hall. Jordan confirmed that Sidwell had been under investigation for months, but Mason's involvement meant the investigation had been compromised. Anna, with her sharp instincts honed from years in the WSB, warned that Mason's confession was only the beginning, that someone else had been providing Sidwell the kind of intel Mason alone couldn't have obtained. Laura pressed for answers, but Anna could only offer theories, and each theory pointed to a single alarming fact: Sidwell was not the mastermind. He was simply the face. A pawn. And someone far more dangerous was pulling the strings. While these strategic conversations unfolded, the rest of Port Charles felt the aftershocks in smaller, personal ways. Ava Jerome, hearing Mason's name linked to Laura and Sonny's scandal, felt a chill crawl up her spine. Mason had stalked her family, held her hostage, threatened her daughter. She knew his capacity for horror. She visited Nina, who, despite her complicated relationship with Sonny, still felt protective of him. Nina's anger flared the moment she learned Mason had helped orchestrate the scandal, especially knowing Sidwell had used her magazine's online platforms to spread the photos before they were scrubbed. The two women, rivals, allies, and everything in between, found themselves united against a common enemy, determined to uncover Sidwell's motives. Even Jocelyn, Trina, Spencer, and Cameron found themselves drawn into the chaos as Dex revealed the truth about Mason's capture. Spencer, fiercely loyal to his grandmother, was enraged by the thought of Laura being targeted in such a disgusting way. He vowed to protect her at all costs, even if it meant confronting Sidwell himself. Jocelyn, however, warned Dex that Sonny stepping into another war would only escalate tensions and put everyone in danger. But Dex, understanding how deeply this attack had cut, knew Sonny wouldn't rest until Sidwell's operation was crushed. As all this unfolded, Sidwell, paranoid and cornered, became increasingly reckless. He fled from his safe houses, made desperate calls to contacts who no longer trusted him, and attempted to pay off smugglers to get him out of Port Charles. But every move he made only left more breadcrumbs. Sonny's men tracked him, Valentine's allies monitored the borders, and even the police increased surveillance on docks and abandoned warehouses. Sidwell thought he was running from Sonny, but he was also running from the real mastermind who had empowered him. And that mastermind was growing impatient. Days after Mason's capture, a cryptic message began circulating among Sidwell's former associates: loose ends must be cut. Brick intercepted the message, and when he showed it to Sonny, Sonny understood immediately what it meant. Sidwell wasn't just in hiding, he was being hunted. Not just by Sonny, but by someone else entirely. Meanwhile, Laura received a mysterious envelope at City Hall, delivered with no return address and no tracking information. Inside was a single flash drive and a note that read, "He was only the first." Against her better judgment, Laura played the drive in a secure room. The footage left her breathless. It showed Sidwell meeting with a masked individual whose posture, voice distortions, and mannerisms were carefully concealed. But the conversation was chilling. The masked figure instructed Sidwell to undermine Corinthos' influence, expose the mayor, and dismantle the alliances that keep Port Charles stable. Laura realized this was never about scandal. It was about destabilization. It was about power. And someone powerful enough to orchestrate this wanted chaos. Laura contacted Sonny immediately, and the two met in a hidden location to discuss the footage. As they watched the video together, Sonny felt his anger deepen, not because of the scheme itself, but because the masked individual seemed familiar in ways he couldn't explain. The cadence. The confidence. The condescension. Sonny recognized the energy of someone who believed themselves untouchable. Someone who had not only studied him but understood him. As Sonny and Laura worked through theories, the danger level in Port Charles heightened. A shipment intended for Sonny's organization was hijacked. A city contract under Laura's jurisdiction was hacked. Anonymous threats circulated through online forums. And through it all, Sidwell ran, desperate and alone, unaware that Mason's downfall had set a chain reaction in motion that would ultimately consume him too. Everything built toward a single night, the night when Sidwell, exhausted and paranoid, crept into an abandoned textile factory on the edge of the city, thinking it would be a safe place to hide. But the moment he stepped inside, he realized he was wrong. The lights flickered on. And standing in the shadows was the masked mastermind from the video. Sidwell begged for help, insisted he had done what he was asked, claimed Mason's capture wasn't his fault. But the masked figure stepped forward, calm and cold, and said only one sentence: "You've become a liability." That was the last anyone saw of Sidwell alive. The next morning, Sonny received an anonymous text containing a single image: Sidwell's abandoned burner phone smashed to pieces, lying on the concrete floor of the factory. Laura received the same image. And beneath it, a message that sent a shockwave through both of them: Phase 2 begins. The implication was terrifying. Mason had been revealed. Sidwell had been silenced. But someone else, someone far more calculated, was still pulling the strings. And now that Mason's role in the photo scandal was exposed, the true mastermind no longer needed to hide behind pawns. Port Charles had only seen the opening chapter. The war was just beginning. But the terror truly took hold in Port Charles the moment word spread that Sidwell had vanished without a trace, leaving behind nothing but the chilling message announcing that Phase 2 had begun, a message that confirmed everyone's worst fear. The person orchestrating this chaos wasn't just strategic, they were bold enough to taunt both Sonny and Laura directly, daring them to try and stop what was coming next. Tension crackled through the city like static electricity as Sonny tightened security around his family, posting additional guards at Carly's house, doubling protection for Donna, Avery, and Christina, and ordering Dex and Brick to run non-stop surveillance on any known associates of Sidwell. Laura, meanwhile, moved with the quiet determination of a woman who had seen far too many enemies rise and fall. She called an emergency session with the council under the guise of infrastructure concerns, but everyone close to her knew the truth: Laura was preparing the city for a storm it wasn't ready to face. Yet beneath her mayoral resolve, the threat pierced her deeply. It wasn't just about her safety or Sonny's reputation anymore, it was about the realization that someone had deliberately targeted the bond she shared with Sonny, their history, their trust, and their shared responsibility to Port Charles. Whoever had designed this plot understood them both intimately and sought to exploit every vulnerability they possessed. Meanwhile, Mason, held in a secure location under tight supervision, grew increasingly agitated, pacing circles, muttering to himself, and flinching at every sound, as if he knew retribution was coming and coming fast. Chase and Dante questioned him repeatedly, but Mason remained frustratingly cryptic, claiming that revealing the mastermind's identity would break the city in half. Dante, sensing Mason's growing fear, warned Sonny that the mastermind must be someone powerful enough to terrify even Mason, a man who had once stared death in the face without blinking. In the midst of this, new clues surfaced: a coded transaction linked to offshore accounts, a mysterious shipment arriving at Pier 47, and multiple sightings of unfamiliar operatives moving discreetly through the city's industrial district. Each clue pointed to one conclusion: the mastermind was assembling something, preparing for a dramatic escalation that would strike at the heart of Port Charles. Sonny, refusing to sit back and wait for the next blow, gathered his closest allies in the backroom of Pozzolo's, laying out a plan to lure the mastermind out by exploiting the one thing he knew they couldn't resist: control. Laura, hearing of Sonny's risky decision, demanded to be involved despite the threats, determined not to be sidelined or treated like prey. Together, they crafted a strategy combining law enforcement, intelligence gathering, and Sonny's underground network, a temporary alliance of necessity, built on survival. Yet even as they planned, a sense of unease settled over the city. People spoke in whispers. Every shadow looked like an ambush. Every unexpected sound felt like a warning. Because everyone sensed the same terrifying truth: if Phase 2 was starting now, then the mastermind had only just begun to reveal their true intentions. And what came next would change Port Charles forever.